maybe it's ego, maybe it's, I like myself, but I love the way my brain works. I like that I look at things differently. I like that the popcorn thing might drive my wife nuts sometimes, but, I enjoy that my brain functions differently than a lot of people. And I think in the right environment, there's a lot of power to that. And I think we need to start putting the ROI in neurodiversity. We need to start putting the strength in it. We need to start talking about it for not something that needs to be fixed, but something that needs to be harnessed for when it can, the power that it could bring.
So can I ask, were you always thrilled with the way your brain works? Adam Clipner joins us today. He serves as head of strategy at LinkTech, a staffing provider that helps companies rethink how they hire and build teams. They specialize in strength based, cognitive, and neurodiverse hiring. They help organizations reduce mishires, they boost retention, and align their teams not just by skills, but by the way people naturally think, collaborate, and solve problems. Their approach is simple, but it is different. And I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation. And I think it reflects a level of thinking that every leader today needs to adopt and evolve their approach to leading every employee in this new, increasingly complex world of work. You can make the case that we have always had broad range of neurodiverse thinkers in the workplace, but only recently in the last few years has that really been acknowledged. When it comes to Link Tech, first, they reverse engineer hiring based on team dynamics, leadership style, and cognitive strength. They use data, conversations, and real human insight to craft candidate stories, not just match keywords. They prioritize fit, impact, and long term success for both permanent hires and contract staffing needs. And what I love about Adam is that he has a real passion for celebrating diversity of thought, for connecting good people, and for building work environments where lived experiences are seen as strengths, not outliers. And I share his belief that the best teams are made up of people with different paths, different perspectives, and the courage to show up exactly as they are, rather than putting so much energy into pushing their square peg into someone else's round hole. That sounds, I'm sorry, vaguely wrong to say, but nevertheless, welcome, Adam. And I mean, I know that's a big buildup. And, I've said to people, I would prefer when you introduce me, set low expectations and let me exceed them. So sorry about the huge buildup, but
All good.
I, I'm thinking a good start would be just for you to maybe fill in the blanks or to just start with the story of how you got to where you are today, like how you've evolved your thinking and your experience. And so let's just hear about you, and then we'll take this conversation where it naturally goes.
Yeah, man, I love it. And you are right. That is quite the intro. And I'll be honest, I couldn't have done it better myself. So that is that is good. We got to get you an intro somehow though. We got to get you a build up, somebody intro you, but it was good, man.
I'm the oh, what is it? I'm the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, the old Wizard of Oz. I like it. So no, yeah, I mean, my background is it's a little all over the place. Kind of typical ADHD style has bounced down my career and kind of found a home in staffing and but the through line through my whole career has been a passion. And that's really where this starts. And to be honest with you, the whole thing comes from lived experience. My passion around diversity and diversity of thought comes from, my family. My wife is African American, my kids are mixed race, and when they grew up and entered the workforce, I didn't want to figure out what box they didn't
Mhm.
check a box. They're black, they're white, they're raised in the same household, same parents. Couldn't be more different than they're such opposite kids. And to me now it's like, why aren't we talking about that? Right? Why aren't we talking about the unique tangibles that we all bring to the workforce in such beautiful ways? Skills don't encapsulate that, right? What you can code or how if you know agile, you know waterfall, that doesn't tell you who you are. It doesn't tell you what you're able. And my own experience being a neurodiverse, entrepreneur and being in the neurodiverse community, I felt like neurodiversity was this term with so many different interpretations. and
Yeah.
so much confusion around it. And it impacts everybody, right? I mean, you go to the grocery store and 1 in 5 people in that grocery store are neurodivergent. You just don't know, right? There's no base, there's no name to it. And it felt like it's this kind of elephant in the room in the workforce for the longest time that nobody really wanted to talk about until recently, which is, oh, it may be a diagnosis, 30 years ago. But it felt like something that needed to be talked about. Felt like something that needed to be addressed. And the reality is, I mean, the term's new. It only came out in '98, which in modern history is a pretty new term.
For
And
sure.
the reality is, neurodiversity in simplest form is just the fact that we all think, we all look at the world differently. We all have different lived experiences. We all have different approaches. And I find such beauty in that, right? That we all have whatever have brought us in our lives to this point, we carry it with us and we bring unique insight, we bring unique intangibles. Now, obviously, there's neurodivergence, which not my favorite term because I feel like it term divergence is divergence from normal. And I feel like neurodiversity is the new normal. I mean, you look at 1 in 4 in the workforce, 1 in 3 likely in tech, like can't really argue those numbers. But you look at what is termed the neurodivergent today as, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, et cetera. It's been used in a medical model for the longest time as something to fix, something that's broken, something that needs to be changed. And to me, maybe it's ego, maybe it's I like myself, but I love the way my brain works. I like that I look at things differently. I like that I, can popcorn think it might drive my wife nuts sometimes, but I enjoy that my brain functions differently than a lot of people. And I think in the right environment, there's a lot of power to that. And I think we need to start putting the ROI in neurodiversity. We need to start putting the strength in it. We need to start talking about it for not something that needs to be fixed, but something that needs to be harnessed for what it can, the power that it could bring.
So can I ask, were you always thrilled with the way your brain works? Or is that something you eventually arrived at? Or were you always just happy acknowledging you tend to think differently than the average or typical, and that was perfectly fine with you?
Yeah, that's actually fantastic question. And, when I was first diagnosed, it told I have pretty severe ADHD. So apologies to everybody listening. I talk a lot. You'll get
Mhm.
used to that. But it was, my first inclination was like, there's no way. Like, I don't have ADHD because the stigma back then was you were like the Jack Russell Terrier just running, circles in the room with your
Exactly.
carpet. And I was like, I was an active kid, but I was no more active than any other kid my age, right? I did sports, I did your typical stuff, but I could sit still in class just fine. And the way they described it, like, well, no, that's not it. It's that your brain is overactive. Brain doesn't stop. Okay, that checks out, right?
Mhm.
But again, going to the medical model, they were like, hey, we need to put you on medication, put you on, we need to help with your attention. And I was like, okay, well, try it. And what the medication did for me personally, now everybody's different, right? Some it works really well. I don't want to broad scope this by any means, but
Sure.
it pertains to me myself. It slowed my brain down so much to where I didn't like the way my brain worked. It masked itself as depression. And they tried treating me for depression. And they tried, and I said, I'm not a depressed person. I'm a happy guy. I'm fine. I don't like my brain operating slow. I don't like slowing down. I like the way my brain was working normally before. Now, did it create challenges in neurotypical systems? Yeah, it did. Right. And I had to learn how to navigate that. I was lucky enough to play collegiate sports and I learned very quickly on, like I had to rent a room in the library after practice and I'd lock myself in there for 2 hours. Thank goodness we didn't have smartphones to distract me back then. I'm old enough to be pre-smartphone era, but I locked myself in the library and I forced myself to learn and study. And there were certain things that I had to do differently to kind of navigate these neurotypical systems. But I was okay with that because I liked the way my brain functioned naturally. I liked that, yes, sometimes it moves quick. Sometimes,
Yeah.
it's all over the place, but it also allows me to look at things that nobody else sees, right? I'll be out and it allows me, honestly, I'm a naturally extremely curious person. And so I'm always trying to solve problems and I'm always finding the littlest things that most people find boring, fascinating. And to me, that's exciting. I love learning. I love discovering new things. And the way my brain works, it's always looking at random things and trying to figure out why it is the way it is and how it is. And to me, that's fun. Right. And so to answer your question, personally, I always liked the way my brain worked, but the medical model didn't for a while, and they tried to treat it, tried to slow me down, and finally ripped the Band-Aid off and was like, no, I'm fine. I just need a working system that I
Yeah.
can.
So a lot of young people and even adults who are diagnosed as adults have actually not had your experience. They've
Mhm.
had very challenging experiences where because they weren't diagnosed, or even if they were, um, because of their unique brand of neurodiversity, they have struggled either with, attention control, executive function, um,
Mhm.
the ability to have lasting relationships, the ability to carry through and make things happen. And depending, of course, on their circumstances, their environment, their support system. But for a lot of people, they end up with really struggling lives. And
Yeah.
I've spoken with a fair number of adults who they will say, for 20 years, I just thought I was a loser. I just thought I was broken. I just thought I didn't
Mhm.
have the discipline that other people had, or I didn't have I didn't have something. I didn't have it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then once this realization that I had either a diagnosis or just self-awareness that there's an issue that can be identified, can be defined, can be addressed in some way, whether through medication or coaching or self-development. Um, and suddenly they start to get things a little more right, for lack of a better word. Like they start to get more traction with their life.
Mhm.
I've talked to several who go through a period of depression or anger where they say
Yeah.
that because now they see their past through this prism of if only I had known, or if
Yeah.
only someone had noticed, or if
Yeah.
only I had been medicated, or if only, and for some of them, it's a big challenge to get past that anger, either anger
Mhm.
at the world, themselves, their parents, their whomever. Do you have conversations with folks like that for whom their neurodiversity either has or is creating real challenges for them?
Absolutely. Every week I talk to folks that have struggled with it. And I think, to be honest with you, I don't know that I've talked to somebody who hasn't struggled with it at some point. Like, I just talked about my struggles with it in school and being medicated and how it just, that the systems of trying to solve it didn't work necessarily for me. Now, I think just about all of us at the neurodiverse community have probably, and I don't want to speak for everyone because everyone's different, but have probably struggled with it at some point, right?
Mhm.
But what I find is typically the struggles are because they're in the wrong environment. They're not able to utilize those strengths. And honestly, Dan, I feel like I'm one of the rare ones to be lucky enough to be diagnosed when I was 30. I
Yeah.
feel like I talk to more and more people every week who are diagnosed in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s. Super common trend is, their teenage kid is diagnosed, and they're like, well, wait, just like my kid, that leads them to go get diagnosed. And it is this epiphany moment of, oh, that's why I've always looked at things the way I've looked at her. That's why I struggle communicating in this end. That's why, I struggle here, or I have challenges there. And there is frustration of, I wish I would have known sooner. Of course, there's frustration. It's me. I wish I would have never got medicated. I wish it would make me depressed. I wish that I would have gone through that phase of my life the way it is. But I look at that now and I go, I've learned. I've learned about my brain. I've learned about my strengths. I've learned about what I'm good at, how I can harness that, how I can take that movement forward. And, of course, we all have, there are times here not, right? I'm sure all of us can look at our past and say, man, I wish I would have known this earlier. I wish I wouldn't have made this mistake.
Yeah.
I wish I would have, done this differently. That's life, right? But I think having that clarity moving forward opens up a lot of doors for you to realize whether it's in the workforce, personal life, etc., to go, okay, I got a new outlook on what I'm good at. And I got a new outlook on where I'm going to struggle and what environments maybe aren't right for me and what ones are. And I think that epiphany of understanding your strengths and understanding hey, yeah, this has been a hindrance, but when I look back through, here's the through line that I've been really successful. And here's the through line of where I've done really well. Right. And I think the biggest frustration for me when I talk to a lot of folks is the hiring systems, getting a job, people who are open to work for Neurodiverse, they're all, not all, because there are some companies that do a good job of this, but large majority are run through neural systems, even though
Yeah.
we know the workforce is cognitively diverse, right? I mean, if you have a team greater than five, you've got somebody who's neurodiverse on your team, you just maybe don't know it or not. But we're running it through this paper to paper system where this whole, equality system of, hey, we keep the same interview process fair for everyone. They're the same for everyone, so it's fair for everyone. Great. That's fair for the one subset that fits that interview process. But it's going to weed out brilliant minds don't think the way that that interview process is laid out. And then you wonder why you lack innovation, why you're getting groupthink on your teams, why everybody's starting to come through the same approach. Well, you're weeding out the same neurotype out of that interview process every time. And I think there's a lot of frustration with neurodivergent individuals and neurotypical individuals, to be honest, of not being able to get their story across, not being able to tell why they're uniquely fit for a role and why they're uniquely set up to bring value to a company. I think the current systems create biases, to be honest with you. I mean, a piece of a resume, there's currently no way to not create a bias off paper. You have to judge somebody what's written on that. Yeah. And so we're all being judged constantly. We're all subject to a quick 30-second bias of somebody scanning your resume and saying, here's who you are. Well, no, that's what I've done in a given environment. It doesn't tell you what I can do forward given this environment. Right. And so I think the frustrations are largely systemic. Well, I don't, when not utilize it, right?
Well, and I think I said this to you in a previous conversation. My, if you look at the span of my career, let's say it's about 40-ish years. Um,
Yeah.
the first half was an absolute struggle. Not I mean, I was successful, but I was working hard and I was bored a lot. And there was a moment of realization where I looked at my history and I realized I to do really well, I need a juicy problem. I need something big to solve. I need something broken to fix. And then once it's fixed, I need to turn over. I need someone to turn over because I am the last person you want keeping the trains running. I'm the person to fix the wheels. You can have the train running and the wheels being wobbly and the thing about to completely fall apart, and I will lead the team to get the train running smoothly, but then it is time to let me move on to the next thing. Well, once I had that realization, it it became part of my story that I told myself. Honestly, that I would say that was the one fulcrum for me, the focal point, because my entire past of, I'm gonna say, what I perceived as failures, when I looked at it through that new lens, I realized, "Oh, that wasn't me failing because I did really well for the first 2.5 years while we were fixing that department."
Yeah.
And it was only the last year and a half where I kinda got bored and disconnected, and that's
Yeah.
that's where it became challenging. So I was able to actually rethink my past, but then also tell my story going forward. And I was both brutally honest, and I also made sure that I didn't take on roles that would just bore me to tears. I just said
Yeah.
from the very beginning in the interviews that I used the analogy that I just used with you. And of course, what's scary is that does screen some people out. I mean, it does. There were some employers who said, "Well, thank you very much. That's fantastic for you. Maybe not so much for us." I remember a particular job interview where I think I used the line, um, I'm I seek out really big, juicy assignments. I like to fix what's broken. And I think I said to it was a female CEO, and I think I said to her, like, within your organization, where would you say you are most challenged? I might have even used the word broken. And it was clearly the wrong question because she just went flat and she said, "Well, I don't think any part of us is broken."
Yeah.
Um, and didn't go well and fine. I actually, a great save for her and a save for me. Um, but if you don't have that realization about yourself, whether it's that specific or something else, man, it, I was hard on myself for a long time. And it
Yeah.
takes a while to get comfortable in your own skin to be able to say, "Hey, world, this is who I am. This is how I process." Then, as I began to learn more, and I'm doing the thing that we do, where we I talk a lot. So I'm
Yeah.
going to take a breath here in a moment. But as I realized the characteristics that come along with the way my brain is wired, um, suddenly I felt much more comfortable saying to my employer, I'm not going to go to that evening event because in a room of 500 people with loud music and loud noise, it's just not me. It's just not good for me.
Yeah.
And I had this fear that I was going to be I don't know, judged for that.
Yeah.
And it was a non-issue. And in fact, I didn't have to I didn't play the neurodiversity card. I just said big rooms with loud music, just not for me. And then from that point, it was fine. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think a lot of leaders, I mean, there are really two paths to go down in this conversation. One is from the personal point of view, recognizing who we are, how we're built, how we're wired to lead. And I get it. I am not always the greatest leader
Mhm.
because uh, maintenance of relationships, not my strength.
Yep.
But once I've acknowledged that, once I've said to myself, "Okay, that's a huge gap," but I also know how important that is. The weekly check-ins, the weekly engagements, the the connecting as humans, not just as a collection of business objectives.
Right.
Um, and I know it's nerdy, but when I write that down and I put my Post-it note on my at the beginning of the week to remind myself that's enough for me. That's the reminder that I need, and then I do what needs to be done, but it doesn't come naturally, and it probably will
Yeah.
never come naturally for me.
For sure. For
The
sure.
other half is so thinking about ourselves, and then the other half is thinking as leaders of neurodiverse people, how do we how do we recognize them, see them, help them, coach them? Um, I could have really benefited years ago from a leader who could have just said, "Hey, we love your passion, and sometimes you oververbalize."
Yep.
Now, someone did say it to me once. Someone said to me, "Man," because I do a lot of presentations, and we were there was a PowerPoint deck on the screen, and that guy said, he said, "Man, you have never met a bullet point that you didn't love. You could talk every one of those bullet points all the way
Yeah.
down." Now, he said it with such humor that I didn't really get it until a
Right.
long time later, and I realized, oh, you were kind of nicely saying you could dial this back just a bit and you'd be just fine.
Right.
Um, so you're in this unique situation where you work with applicants, people who are looking for work, and you work with employers who are looking for people.
Yep.
That's gotta be fascinating being that kind of matchmaker.
It is. It is. Yeah. And I think you touched on a lot of really important points in that story there. And I think, you know, again, a lot of the framing is that there's something wrong with it, right? And you talking about how you got to solve a big juicy problem. Like honestly, my brain works the same way. If I don't understand the why behind something, I can't reverse engineer it. And so
Mhm.
if I go into an deployment or I go to a problem, if the problem doesn't have a why are we fixing this or why, where are we going or direction where we're going, I'm going to shut down because I can't reverse engineer without the why, right? I don't work in an operational capacity where I'll just come in and knock out busy work and then close my book and
Yeah.
leave for the day and collect a paycheck. Not the way my brain operates. I've got to understand why are we building? What are we doing? And if I can understand that, I can reverse engineer that, right? And I think that the most common and most important thing I think to realize here is there's nothing wrong with that. right? There's nothing wrong with you going to a job for 2 to 3 years, fixing them, helping them get to that maintenance mode, building that up, and then moving on to something else. Now, some people look at resume and they'll go, why is he job hopping? Why is he changing? Why is he moving a career? Well, it's not with his strength. It's not maintenance mode. And he's being honest and helpful to that employer by not sticking around for another 2.5 years collecting a paycheck of something he can do, but he's not good at. And he can do it, but it's not what he's best function for. And so I think sometimes we automatically look at things like that. We say, what's wrong? And I think the right framing is, what impacted you? And why did where did you get them to? What were your strengths? What were you really good at? And I think, to be honest with you, Dan, neurodivergent or not, we all have ways that we work. We all have environments.
Yeah.
We all have strengths that we utilize. It's just not talked about enough. Right. And so I think, even leaders, not leaders, like some of us just work really well in an operational capacity. Some of us work really well in a creative capacity. Some of us work really well, big picture thinking. It's not akin to only neurodivergent minds. Now, are there traits that associate with certain neurodiverse minds? Like, yeah, there are, but again, they're not all the same. And so I think we've got to look at this through a lens of what the true definition of neurodiversity is, which is it's akin to violence. The simple fact that we all think that we all look at the world different. We all have different lived experiences. We all have things we're really good at. We all have things we're really bad at. You looking at your follow-up list and staying in touch with people, like you diagnose that as this, you understand that that's not one of your strengths. I think we need to give ourselves permission to say that. So what am I really good at? What can and in the world of AI and automation and technology, how can I automate the tasks that I'm maybe not so good at, so it frees me up time to utilize what I'm really good at and it utilizes my strengths? And I think that is where AI can be really powerful in a lot of things. Is cool. I understand not my strength, not what I'm really good at. Is there a way for me to automate those tasks so that I can focus on what I'm really good at, focus on my strength, and focus on my unique intangibles that I bring to the table that nobody else does? So I think sometimes it's giving permission to say, not really that good at that. And that's okay. You can't all be phenomenal at everything we do. We all bring strengths. We all bring weaknesses, neurodiverse or not, right? And I think when I look at matching candidates to employers, I think the current systems as it sits right now is a very much a paper to paper system. Very much give me a job description, give me a resume, throw it in a portal. Let's hope the keywords align well enough. Let's do a quick interview, maybe a quick coding assessment, or maybe a quick conversation. Cool, you have the skills, hire the person. Then what? Right? Oh, why aren't they in it? Why are they on a performance plan 6 months in when all the references said they were the best employee ever and they can do the job? I think we've got to look at it. And I think we've got to look at it through environment, leadership style, cognitive approach. I think those, especially in today's, world of automation and AI replacing tools and tools becoming, not as important as what they were. I think cognitive approach, critical thinking, environmental factors, I think when you look at it through that lens, creates a much more successful environment for somebody to come in and be able to start day one, be in a position where they can utilize their strengths, gain tangible results, and get the ground running instead of that kind of 2 to 3 month dating phase of saying, you have the skills, but now what?
If the thesis of this podcast is true, and to summarize the thesis, that it is that the world is changing rapidly. I mean, it's been changing for eons, but it's especially changing rapidly. We are cognitively overloaded. We are awash in information and misinformation. Technology is advancing so rapidly. There are cultural conflicts, generational conflicts, lots of other conflicts in the workplace. Work is more complex and faster than ever before, and leaders are struggling to catch up. They're struggling to keep up. If that thesis holds, I do think the leader of the future, the leader of 2030 and beyond, is going to have to master the kinds of things that you're talking about, is going to have to be a master of recognizing my people, not just how old are you, not just your LinkedIn profile, but actually see you deeper and deeper so that the more I understand you, the more I recognize what your needs are and how to help you grow and evolve, and maybe even recognize when it's time for you to move on. For your benefit, it's time for you to move on, or it's time for me to shift you to another role or whatever it might be. But
Yeah.
that's a harder task to say, look at your
I,
team and don't see a group of KPIs. Look at your
I,
team and see a group of humans.
I think you're spot on, but I think there's one thing missing that doesn't get talked about enough. And I think that is before the leader worries about his team or her team, the leader needs to understand themselves. And so what we do first and foremost, whenever I work with a new client, I say, don't send me a job description. I need to understand, who are you as a leader first? Let's dissect
Yeah.
that for 20 minutes. Don't need a ton of time, but let's dissect that for 20 minutes. And I'm always shocked at the results they get, because lots of times leaders get, I haven't always thought about that yet. Well, we're leading a team of 30, 40, 50 people. We gotta understand who you are first, right? And that lead to, and you run a really structured environment, on a very, you run very ambiguous environment. How
Yeah.
often do you meet with your team? What's your feedback loop like? How often are you giving feedback to your team? What's the cognitive makeup of your, but I think in order to create that successful hire, you've got to understand first operationally who this leader is and their mindset, their growth objectives, and what they're trying to solve on the business front, because that can change through variations in systems as well. Right. And I think, it also matters what phase of the business are you in. R&D mode? Are you in post production? Are you in, production mode? Like, where are you on the business front? And where are you trying to go in the next year or 12 months, or 60 months, 18 months, whatever it is, because that's going to change the type of mindset of the candidate that you want to hire, based off of where the business unit is, based off of your leadership style, based off of cognitive approach of the team, or some collaborative or some ICs or some customer facing. Where does the role fit into that cognitive approach? You got to dissect that first, because that's never going to show up on a job description. Job description is never going to tell
Yeah.
you any of those things, right? And I think once you dissect that, now you got to look at, does our interview process match the cognitive approach of the role? Are we going to pull out the right neurotype, going to succeed in this given position that's also going to integrate? And I don't think neurotype gets looked at enough, of what type of neurotype or what type of cognitive approach you're going to pull out of that interview process, because that interview process should change based off of the cognitive approach that you're going to be looking for. After we figure all that out, then you got to tell me about the tools, right? But reality is, more and more conversations I have with leaders, the tool becomes less. After you dissect all this, the tools become, oh, let's say 60, 70% time less important, right? Say you're hiring the data analyst, and you need the data analyst to come in that really understands the business unit and digest the data and pull out the data. Okay, well, I give you a 15-year data analyst that used the Tableau for the last 15 years. Well, your team currently uses Power. Okay, well, it's going to take that data analyst a week to ramp up on Power BI and get used to it and know the tool. It took them 15 years to understand how to dissect the data, how to extract the data, how to pull that data and converse that data to your specific business. So when I screen a candidate, I want to understand, how do you look at, how do you use the data to solve this business outcome? Is that worth giving up a week of on-ramping on a new tool? 90% of the time, no. Right. And so I
Yeah.
think there's a full holistic picture that's going to set stakeholders up for success, but understanding how the candidate thinks, the environment they work well in. You run a super structured environment, the last thing I want to do is put somebody who needs to be ambiguous, who doesn't want to be told what to do, who doesn't want to be told do this, this, and this. They just say, here's the problem, figure out and solve it. I don't want to make the leader adapt his or her leadership style for 30 different people. It's just never going to happen. We could say,
Right.
yeah, ideally that's great. It's not going to happen. We've got to place people in environments where they can use those strengths and contribute the way that they naturally contribute. To me, all of these things are always done post hire, and I had never understood, why don't we solve this pre-hire, so that now we set the hire manager, that leader, up for success, because they understand the environment this person's going to be successful. They understand before they start day one how to manage the person. They understand how to integrate with them with the team. They understand Here's what this person's really good at. Here's how they're going to help us solve our business problem. Here is the position I'm going to put them in to gain traction who they want. We're failing leaders by doing this paper to paper system. We're failing candidates too, but I don't think it gets talked about enough. I mean, everybody knows who's on the job hunt right now that's getting failed by current system. That's well known. I don't think people are talking enough about how we're failing leaders with these systems and how we're failing hiring managers and stakeholders by essentially saying they've got the skills, put them on your team and good luck. That to me is one of the biggest mistakes that we're making.
You know what? I even think back to, I think it was the 80s or 90s when Jim Collins wrote the book Good to Great, and getting, you know, his phrase was getting the right people in the right seats on the bus, which is great. It was it was good leadership development training, but there was actually very little in terms of um, thinking through how someone operates. It was more about experience, more about, you know, that kind of
Yep.
that. So I think it's great that the world is shifting more to thinking more deeply about that. When employers come to you, um, do they come to you or your group seeking this kind of work, or do they come to you because you're a staffing agency and they need some staffing help, and then you help them, uh, I guess, deepen their thinking in this place? Is it a little of both?
It's a little both. I think, yes, some come to us because they need stuff maybe and they need somebody that they trust, needs going to find them great talent. But I think most come to us, honestly, the conversation initiate out of curiosity. What is cognitive diversity? What is neurodiversity? What do you guys heard the term, but like, tell me what you guys do differently. Like, what does it actually mean? Right. And I think, there's a lot of fronts in the neurodiversity space right now, to be honest with you. And there's a lot of misconceptions and there's a lot of really hasn't changed from when I was diagnosed 13 to 30 years ago, when I was 13, to the stigmas attached. And I
Mhm.
think people are curious about that and they're wondering. And I've had the most range of questions about this. I've had some people ask me, when you staff neurodivergent people, do you staff their caretakers too? Wait a minute, let's pause here.
Okay, yeah.
Silicon Valley was born out of the neurodivergent, right? Look at all the leaders that started these tech companies. They started this, they were successful because they thought, well, they looked at problems, they looked at approaches. And so I think there's a general curiosity around it. And I also think there's a lot of misunderstanding. And I think some companies right now are really trying to solve this problem and look at it. Not even, again, I don't want to say that. I mean, it's not a problem. They're wondering how to take action for ROI. And I think
Yeah.
companies and the ones that are doing it right and successfully, the data is showing the results are phenomenal, right? I mean, they're showing, cognitive diverse teams are outperforming neurotypical teams, by 30, 40%, right? Or teams that are neurodiverse are 130% more effective, right? I mean, there's the data behind it now is too much to hide. But I also think there's some companies that are using this as kind of a CSR, and it's a feel good story that, hey, we have a neurodiverse hiring. I saw one, a few months ago who they had a neurodiverse hiring portal, had 0 roles open in the neurodiversity hiring portal. But on their main page, they had 200 engineering roles. And my brain goes, so you don't think on a 200 engineers that some of these folks might be neurodivergent, clearly don't understand neurodiversity, or this is
Yeah.
CSR initiative to make you feel good, make your company look good. And so I think there is still a lot of navigating and clarity around helping companies understand the ROI in this space and understand, I think the biggest thing that I try to help companies understand is your team is already diverse. You have a cognitively diverse workforce, whether you realize it or not. Again, neurodiversity just doesn't face. We all look different. We all sound different. We all approach things different. Outside of me talking a lot and talking fast, nobody's going to know that, right? Like there's no necessarily tell sign that you have. But what I try to get them to understand is your teams are, diverse, already have a cognitive diverse workforce. Why are our systems all based on neurotypical systemic processes that look for one type of thinking, that look for one system, that evaluate resumes the same, that evaluate every candidate the same way? And then you wonder why you're lacking innovation. You wonder why you have phenomenal people on performance plan 6 months in and wondering like they should have been the perfect hire, but now, well, yeah, because you didn't look at the environment, you didn't look at thinking styles, you didn't look at the holistic viewpoint. And so, when companies come to us, we truly try to help them understand, like, you don't need to change your entire company to appease the nervous community. They're already there. They're already a part of your company. They're already a much
Right.
larger thing that everyone realize. You just got to look at it through a different lens.
And so, in that spirit, one of the areas where I think there are misconceptions is like the kind of job roles that are ideal for the neurodiverse. Um, the common assumptions might be, well, those are the computer nerds, those are the IT geeks,
Mhm.
those are the analysts, and that may be true, or some neurodiverse people, sure, would be great
Mhm.
at those roles. Um, but if you ask yourself, well, what about neurodiversity and salespeople? I can't imagine that they would make great salespeople, because don't they have challenges, having rapport with people? Don't they have challenges with relationships? And sales is all about relationships, or sales is all about whatever. The reality is some of the best salespeople I know are absolutely neurodiverse.
The
And
majority of them probably are.
oh man, and the characteristics that I see in them is, number one, their brain is clocking all the time. So one of the reasons they've gotten so good at what they do is because they see humans in layers. So they'll have this conversation, and at the exact same time that they're having this conversation, they'll have the one underneath that, and sometimes even the one underneath that.
Well, and
They'll
they're solutions oriented. So
Yeah,
salespeople, not only do you have to be personable in its relationships, and that's 100% sales, but you also have to solve a problem. If your sales don't solve a problem, then you're not selling anything. To me, neurodiverse people are very good at understanding the bigger picture. Okay, here's the solution you need now. Your solution may evolve. Your needs may evolve. What's coming down the pipeline 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the road may evolve. Let's look at micro, the micro right now, but let's look at macro. What's going to happen in 12 months? Like, when we staff people, sometimes, hey, this is what I need current. I need a job developer. I need whatever. I go,
Yep.
it's great that you're in pre-production right now. What's going to happen when you're post? What's going to happen when you're in testing mode? What's going to happen, if this solution doesn't work? What's going to happen when you need to pivot your business model, right? Or what's going to happen when now you're in post-production, you got to go to market, right? Well, okay, can we find somebody that can navigate all three phases? Or if you need a consultant to come in for 6 months during pre-production, then you need somebody to come in post-production. And so the sales is looking at the big picture. And I think a lot of people, you've got to establish relationships that sales are based off of trust, but you also build that trust by being able to look at solutions. And I think that gets lost in sales. It's like, no, you're in sales because you're good at finding solutions.
My favorite characteristic of the neurodiverse, and I say this in a self-serving way, is that they don't like to lie. There's something about lying that just doesn't work. And so there's in a sales role, there's something that happens when you have a conversation with a salesperson, and they really have to share with you some difficult information, because they can't lie, or they won't lie. They don't like to lie. That comes through loud and clear. And I love salespeople like that, who basically have to tell me the way it is,
Yep.
because
They don't
that's how
like
they
it, but
know.
they're going to tell you it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Um, and
But
then I had
also,
a
I
go
looked
ahead.
in real quick at the industries though. I mean, we're in healthcare, we're in green energy, we're in chemical engineering, we're in tech, we're in furniture manufacturing, we're in just about every industry you could think of. We're doing work, right? It's not, yes, there's a large neurodiverse community in tech, and that is a large piece of our business. That's a large piece of what we do. But we're also looking at battery scientists. We're also looking at chemical engineers. We're also looking at, designers. We're also
Mhm.
looking at it's the stigma is, yeah, it's an elephant room in tech, but it's not isolated. The people are the
Right.
people, man. The global population, 1 in 5 in our virtual, like I said, 1 in 4 in the workforce. 1 in 4 people in the workforce don't work, right? Look at doctors, look at nurses. Like, I'm sorry, the doctor population is a huge portion of neurodivergent, right? You kind of need that going through 7 years of medical school and all
Mhm.
that. Like, I think we are so quick to look at the neurodiverse community and strap labels on it. And I think you got to realize it's normal. Well, there's so many people who are neurodivergent. Like, it's not this other group. It's not this like, oh, you guys are the strange ones. You're, oh, let's make a good initiative and make a nonprofit out of this and all that. Like, no, we are a normal part of society. You go to the grocery store, at least a quarter of the people in there are neurodivergent. They don't all work in tech.
Right. Exactly.
Like, it's everywhere.
And I think then over time, I know my mindset has shifted toward really truly seeing. I also have a struggle with the term neurodiversity because it does seem, because then what's neurotypical, what's neurodiverse?
Yeah.
I really think this range. Now, of course, there are extremes. Of course, there are extremes that are truly out of the range of normal. But I think my perception of what the range of normal is has expanded pretty dramatically, and I do think that's how human beings have evolved. That's how life
100%.
evolves. Yeah, so that as the environment shifts, there are going to be some types of living entities that do better in that new environment, whatever that new environment might be. The same is true with humans. There are going to be some environments where someone who is quote unquote neurodiverse sort of naturally rises up. And
Well,
then
and there's data
there'll
behind
be-
that now. You're not wrong. Like, there's fascinating research coming out around autism and it being an evolutionary trait, right? That evolved with that due to survival mechanisms, due to evolutionary traits over time. And so, like, your belief there and your thought there is not based on a feeling. Now there's science behind it. Now there's data behind that. Now there's data behind, the reason we think the way we think, the reason that these, some of us look at things differently isn't just because we're strange or weird. No, it's an evolutionary, trait that has got us to where.
So I think we're coming off of, as a society, we're coming off of maybe a 50 to 70 year span of time that was very mechanistic in the business environment, meaning we needed to fit square pegs into square holes, round pegs into round holes, and we needed people to be as quickly as productive as possible. And everyone had a fit, everyone had a role, and in many cases, everyone looked the same, everyone dressed the same. Essentially, what every business wanted was its own little army where they had their uniforms, they had their way of working. And I'm not saying that was bad. Maybe that was right for the time. So there's a lot that happened through the Industrial Revolution and into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. A lot of stuff was built, a lot of things were created, a lot of progress was made. Now, to be fair, while all that progress was being made, there were also a lot of humans that were ground down, because the system basically wanted to grind people into to fit a particular need within the system. But I think we're now, as we move into the 2030s, I think we're moving away from that. And I don't know exactly what that means. It just it's more of a feeling. We're moving away from that.
I think we might be somewhat, but I also think that then, it looked different, it felt different, but there were still neurodiverse innovators. We just didn't have a term for it. The term came around in 98, but like, the Industrial Revolution, there were still people understanding how to put together the plants and how to put together the machinery and how to solve these problems. And there were still neurodiverse thinkers back then. There were people working the assembly line. Now, were all of them meant for that job? Maybe not. Maybe some of that was due to, the economy. You were forced to do the job and maybe didn't utilize your strengths. But I think also it's the same today. And sometimes we look at these, what we would look at as maybe mundane jobs, or we look at as operational jobs, or working in that, or working wherever. And again, something wrong. And I don't think that's the case. That environment is right for some. Some people love just going to work, punching the clock, doing their, doing what the manual labor, doing whatever labor they want, going home, spending time with their family. That's their strength. They're really good at that. They enjoy that. And I think we need to get away from there's something wrong with that. I think we got to look at what environment you're successful, what environment you enjoy. And I think sometimes we look at, people who are, let's just take pet. because obviously a big part of this conversation, somebody who's been an engineer for, 15 years and they're getting forced and squeezed into going to a management role because that's what's next in their career. But maybe that's not what they love. Maybe they love being host and code. They love solving problems with their hands on the keyboard. Why are we forcing them to manage people if they don't love managing people? They love just being hands on the keyboard. Let's not force them to evolve into a different role. Let them utilize what they're really dang good at, and that's solving problems with the keyboard. And I think we sometimes force people into environments, we force people into roles based off of what we feel is the evolution of the business when it's really not, right? And it's really like, there's nothing wrong with doing what you've been doing for 15, 20 years. If it's what you're really good at, and if you enjoy doing it, not force you out of that. And I think sometimes we're too quick to trying to get people to squeeze into an environment that isn't us.
Man, that is huge. I think that, because you're so right. If you're ambitious and you want your career to progress, there comes a point where most organizations, you top out as an individual contributor. And if you want to continue to grow, continue to make more money, continue to create more and more value for the business, you have to evolve from an individual contributor to a quote leader.
Yeah.
And then, but that's not, of course, that's not right for everybody. Now,
No, and that's why I do think it's changing though, because I do think, look at some of the best AI engineers, prompt engineers, data engineers right now. Look at, what some of these companies are paying. I mean, they're putting, $1 million signing bonus for some of the best engineers. And so I do think the shift is starting to occur back into, hey, you're really good at solving these problems. You're really good at data analytics. We're going to pay you. We're going to pay you handsomely for that. And so I do think it's going to take time, as everything does, right? And we're in a quick moving society, but I do think change is happening slow, quicker than we realize. And I do think that it's starting to shift. I hope it's starting to shift, but it does feel like it's starting to shift towards valuing people for what they're really.
so how would you recommend, let's say, there are folks watching this who either are thinking about themselves or thinking about others, and this whole topic of neurodiversity is somewhat new to them. Um, what would you recommend in terms of self-education, or just, I guess, becoming more conversant with the topic in general?
I think just staying curious, I think empathy goes a long way. And I think understanding and having conversations with other folks in this industry, my door's always open. Anyone who wants to talk about this topic, ping me, message me. But I think curiosity is one of the most underrated aspects of, and I think
Yeah.
being curious, doing research, looking at things and drawing your own. But I think in the age of information, you can go to Gemini, you can go to ChatGPT, you can type in what is neurodiversity, start getting dialogues, like have a conversation of, what does it mean? What does it look like? I think, there's research behind it that's solid, but it is still a new topic. It's not as much research as I'd love. There's not as much data as I would love behind this. I think to progress this forward and normalize it, I think my biggest thing is stay curious, have conversation.
Yeah.
If you are neurodivergent, there's more of us out there than you think, Well, like one of my biggest goals, obviously, yes, we need to run a profitable company. We need to grow this so we can impact more people. But I also want to build a community around in the neurodiversity space, because it's one of these spaces that I feel like doesn't have the community it deserves for how many people are there. And I think I want us to all get more comfortable talking. And I think sometimes what I would say to people is get out of your comfort zone, have that conversation, right? Talk to, if your company has an ERG group and you're neurotypical, go to just hear them talk, learn, be empathetic, create the space where you have true understanding and ask genuine questions about the way people think. And I think you'll realize it's not as different as you will.
I had a young man, this goes back about 5 years ago, who was, I mean, we never had this conversation, but it was clear to me at the time that he was he was neurodiverse. And one of my challenges with him was that I could tell in business meetings when he checked out. Basically, he would stay checked in maybe 20 minutes, as long as it was interesting to him. And then you could just see he would check out. He might start doodling, he might start taking notes, he might just or you just see his eyes glaze over. If he was on deck to do a presentation, he would be on until his presentation was done, and then he would check out. And
Yep.
I so I took him aside, and we had a couple of conversations, and I said, I just want you to know, number one, it's noticeable when you do check out. You may think that you've got this mask on, but it's noticeable. Maybe not by everybody, but I notice. And I said, I think what you may be missing out, because when you check out, that kind of says to me, you're done. Like you're bored. Like this is you've squeezed as much of juice out of this orange as you can. But I said, there's so much more juice in the orange. Did you notice? And then I laid out for him the layers upon layers upon layers of things that are happening in that meeting, the micro behaviors, the expressions, the messages, the things that are said, the things that are not said. We went on and on. I said, there is so much happening. How can you get bored with that? Well, you're bored because you're not noticing that, you're not aware of that. And so we spent some time um, helping him gain an appreciation for how complex humans are and how interesting they are. And you said it almost at the very beginning of this call. You were someone whose brain never shut down,
Yep.
never turns off, and you go out into the world and you just notice things.
Yep.
And some of them you notice and register, some of them you notice and you set them aside. But I do think that's one of the coping mechanisms for someone whose brain overclocks, doesn't stop, is to know
It does.
there's plenty out there to get interested in.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, like if I go to a networking event, kind of have a rule in my house, like when I come home, I need an hour to just decompress and stop because my brain is, I'm not only having the, let's say, me to network, I'm not only having the conversation with you, my brain is registering all the other conversations. Right. And so it drives my wife nuts, but I'll be, I can hear two conversations back and you hear the people behind us talking about this, this, and this. She's like, no, were you listening to us? I mean, yeah, I can tell you every word you said too, but your brain is, we're catching every conversation, we're catching every external stimuli. So it is on all the time. And so you've got to find ways to recharge. You've got to find ways to be able to stay present in the moment, decompress. You've got to learn to balance these things. But again, yes, that's something I deal with as the neurodivergent and the way my brain operates.
Sure.
But there's also things that other neurotypical people have to press with or have to deal with or have to look at that I don't, right? Or they struggle with looking at the big picture. And that's common sense for me. Really easy for me to figure out how to fix something, like brain put it together. Maybe their brain doesn't. And so again, I look at it through the lens of like just empathy, just understanding that we all look at things differently. We all approach things differently. I think, I joke all the time that all these things drive my wife nuts, but I'm the type that even though I'm honestly, I'm more of an introvert at heart, like I'm being by myself. But when I go in public, I'll have a 5-minute conversation with the lady at the cash register or with the person cut my hair or doing what, because I genuinely am curious about it. And if I only going to leave one takeaway with everybody from this conversation, it's to stay curious about each other, about individuals, learn about culture, learn about lived experiences, learn about what they're good at, what they're passionate about. And I think when you lead with empathy like that, you can't help but trickle down into your wins. Can't help but make your teams tighter. You can't help but understand and see the beauty and difference. Because to me, the reason I'm so passionate about diversity is I think it's fast. I do. I think different cultures are fascinating. I think different conversations. I'm a firm believer I can take something out of every conversation I have. And I think most people can when we look at it through that lens. So I think having that empathy and understanding that just saying yes to a conversation, saying yes to a networking chat, saying yes to a conversation with your coworker comes to your desk to ask you about something and investing in those conversations. And I think you'll realize how much you get out of it.
I haven't been able to do it in the last few years, but I used to love political discussions with people who thought differently than I did, because I really, I re- and there were, I genuinely wanted to understand like the logic chain or the thought process or what's driving that. And then I've found in the last few years, it's harder and harder to have those that don't quickly dial up or dial down, into like sides. And that's really, that doesn't really interest me. What interests me is someone who thinks very differently than I do, and where we can have a conversation where we're both transparent and just willing to, without judgment, share what brought us to this way of thinking, and without necessarily
Yeah.
trying to persuade.
I think human nature there, Dan, is to, let's say you're having a political conversation, you're having an uncomfortable conversation with someone. You don't, you don't necessarily agree right away, right? And I think our impulse and our human nature is to is to prove why you're right, is to prove
Yeah.
why your culture is better, the way you look at things better, your political party's better. I find that you can stay quiet, force yourself as hard as it may be, listen to where they're coming from, listen to what they're saying. Don't disagree. Don't find the conflict zone, which is so easy to do. Look at it through their lens, right? Look at it through who they are. And I think you'll find there's probably, as you sit and digest on that conversation hours later, you're probably going to find more of a through line of commonality than you, right?
Yeah.
And I can't help but it's just so silly the way my brain works with this. When I see people, like, oftentimes I'll think about, like, that's somebody's kid, and that's like, when I look at my kids who are 4 and 6, and I look at a 7-year-old man, I'm like, they were once a baby. Like, everything in their life has led them to believe the way that they believe and think the way they think and act the way they are. But at the bottom line, like, we were all just a little kid at some point, and I look at the way my kids interact, their kids at school, they could care less what race they are, what they, talk about, what they believe. And those conversations don't happen. They're just happy to be with another human being, playing a simple game of soft or whatever. And I think there's so much beauty in just like, let's not force division. Let's not force different viewpoints. Let's not, just listen and enjoy being present with another human and hear how they think. And I think, like, when you kind of look at it through like a little kid's lens, like, there's beauty in the naivety that they have of just like, we're all the same.
And if you meet someone as an adult who has clearly drifted far, far away from what you just described, there's always a story there. There's always there's a path that, and it's most of the time a fascinating path. And if you're more interested in the path than in judging them for where they arrived, there's just a lot of interesting humanity in that. And then you're much more likely to have those connections with those kinds of people. So Adam, I want to be respectful of your time, and for anybody that is interested in reaching out to you, I'll make sure that in the show notes for this, we have a link to your website, a link to your LinkedIn profile, and we'll just make it easy to connect with you for those who want to connect with you. And honest, I think this general topic is becoming more and more necessary for a lot of people, more and more eye-opening for a lot of people. And I just truly appreciate you bringing your unique perspective on all of this to the podcast. So thank
I
you.
appreciate that, man. Yeah, and I hope so. I hope it becomes normal, because it is, and that's my goal, is normalize it and put people in environments where they can be happy and utilize their strengths. And it sounds cliche and corny, but I genuinely believe there's a way to do it. We're going to keep fighting to do that. And yeah, I'm a geek with this stuff. I mean, Dan, you and I could talk for hours on this stuff, but it's just, it's something I'm passionate about. So if anybody wants to connect, talk, like, my door is always open. I could go on this stuff forever. So I appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about this, because I think the more of us in this community that are having these conversations, I think the better for